Hello everyone. In this video we're going to talk about basic Python operators, and I'll be using the PyCharm Community Edition IDE for our examples here. Operators in programming are symbols that we use to perform various mathematical and other operations between variables and values. Python supports a large number of operators that are used in many different scenarios, so we'll take a look at just a few to start with, and then we'll build upon those operators as we learn other structures in Python. So the operators we're going to take a look at first are probably very familiar to you from simple mathematics: addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, if you're familiar with modulus and exponentiation. So the general form of most operators is as follows. Normally there's a variable, and then the operator, whatever that might be, which could be any from the list above or others that we'll learn. And then either a value or possibly another variable, or I'll refer to it as structure for now. We'll learn more about that later actually. This can also occur as what might be called a compound operation, where you might have a variable, an operator, another variable, and operator, and possibly in parentheses another operation here as well. And this could go on and on. Okay? Like compound calculations in mathematics, we can perform those operations in Python as well. So we'll start out really simple, and then we'll look at a couple of compound examples as well. We'll start out with just a couple of variables to work with. Let's say some simple numbers to work with. And using the symbols that I've listed up here in the list, addition is the plus sign, and subtraction is minus. Multiplication in mathematics or arithmetic, you're probably used to the symbol being an X. In Python and most programming languages actually, multiplication is the asterisk. And then the slash for division, modulus is a percent sign, and a double asterisk is exponentiation. So to make this easy to see in our console here, I'll actually use the print statement and just do something as simple as x plus y. Okay. So that's an addition operation between our two variables x and y. And if I run this, I can see that the addition, because I haven't given any prompts or anything, all I see is the result of that addition. So 20 plus 10. And we can continue this with, this is a sort of a simple example of a compound where we're using more than two variables, and there's the result of that as well. We can also use any of these operators in combination, right, as well. So x plus y, as we had before, but we could subtract z, let's say. And we get 0 because 20 and 10 is 30, and then subtracted z, which is also 30. If you're familiar with the order of precedence in arithmetic and mathematics, we can set up formulas in Python in a similar fashion so that we can follow the order of precedence based on the mathematical rules. We can take advantage of our knowledge of the order of precedence in mathematics, for example, to, let's say, change this last one, placing a set of parentheses inside of this. And let's use multiplication this time. So before I run this, see if you can determine what the result of that last line there on line 19 will be. So what we can do is we can walk through this manually ourselves, which is actually an important skill to cultivate in programming. So if you remember that the values for x, y, and z are 10, 20, and 30 respectively, right? So if I say 10 plus, parentheses, 20 times 30, and I think about this just in terms of arithmetic, I know that order of precedence, anything inside of parentheses goes first. Also, multiplication, in this example, multiplication would be done before the addition. So in this case, it would be 10 plus 600, right? Or 610. So if we go back up to the top and think about the first four, these are basic arithmetic, addition, subtraction, multiplication. The order of precedence follows the same as what we learned in mathematics. Division has an interesting issue with regards to programming. And this is true of most programming languages. If I were to, let's say, print x, which is 10, right, divided by 0. Computers do not handle division by 0 very well without some extra work on our part. And so if I run this now, I get a division by 0 error, okay? Because division by 0 is undefined. So in a previous video, we sort of mentioned data validation. If I were collecting data from an external source, I would really want to validate the data, especially anything in a division operation like this, to make sure that I'm never trying to divide by 0. And we'll discuss that more at length. Other than that, division works the same as you're familiar with from math as well. I'm going to go ahead and comment that line so I don't get that error anymore. The next operator was the modulus operator. And sometimes this is a little confusing if you're not familiar with it. We use the operator, the percent sign, for modulus in Python. And the way modulus works is it returns the remainder of a division. So if I divide two numbers and they do not divide evenly, the remainder after the division is complete is returned. And so, for example, if I did, let's say, x modulus z, so remember from our variable values up above, that's 10 modulus 30. So we're going to divide 10 by 30, and that modulus operator returns the remainder. If we look at this from an arithmetic perspective, work through this division. So 30 does not divide evenly into 10, so we add a decimal and a 0. Then we can divide 30 into 100 3 times. We multiply the 3 times 30, that's 90. And we do the subtraction. Our remainder in this case is 10. And that's what the modulus operator will return. So let me run this. And there's our remainder. You might be wondering, in what way would we actually use modulus? One of the most common sort of introductory examples is we can use modulus to determine if a number is odd or even. Let's take a look at an example of that. This will be a little bit of a review of a couple of previous topics as well. So let's say I'm going to use input to prompt the user for a number, the int cast function as well, and we'll use the decision statement as well. Notice that what I'm going to do here is test my number, the number that is provided by the user, by modulus 2, which means if I divide whatever number is provided by 2, the result of that, if it's 0, that means that there is no remainder, which means it's an even number. Okay. Otherwise, okay. So make sure you understand how that works. We're using the modulus operator here. We're going to take a number from the user. We're going to use the modulus operator with 2 as the divisor. And if the remainder is 0, it means there is no remainder, which means that any number divided by 2 evenly is even. So let's run this. So I'll put in 24. My number is even. I'll run it again. 33, and the number is odd. So this is a very common way of demonstrating the modulus operator. You'll see that in a lot of videos and textbooks as well about Python, and actually in programming in general as well. So the last operator that we had listed up here was exponentiation, and oftentimes people refer to it as exponents or some number to the power of some other value. So, for example, this is fairly straightforward. What was it? X was 10, right? So if I say x to the exponent of 2, that's going to be 10 times 10. Actually, let me comment this out so I don't get those prompts. So 10 times 10 is 100. If I change that to 3, 10 times 10 times 10, etc. Okay. So all of these operators can be used in compound statements, as we talked about, as I mentioned earlier. And compound statements can be quite complex depending on the calculation that's being performed. So let's take a look at a slightly more complex compound operation. Just going to get rid of all that. A little messy. We're going to go back to our original variables of x, y, and z. So x is 10, y is 20, and z is 30. So if I were to print, let's say x times y times z to the power of 2 divided by y minus x. So the first thing to do with this is to look at, well, of course we could run it, but the first thing to do is to look at this in terms of the order of precedence, keeping in mind that we have some parentheses, right? And we have an exponent, which is a higher precedent than the other operators. And so if we just work this out first, so that's 10 times 20 times 30 to the second power divided by 20 minus 10. And if we take this one piece at a time, we see that it's 200 times 900 divided by 10. And the order of precedence for multiplication and division is the same, so you start left to right. So this would be 180,000 divided by 10, which turns out to be 18,000. If I run this, we see that our result is what we expected. So this process of tracing through a piece of code is a skill that is something that you, as I said earlier, cultivate over time. We'll look at actually tracing code manually in several of the structures that we'll work on throughout the remainder of this series. It's oftentimes people avoid it, but it's actually one of the best ways to really understand how things are working, especially when they become more and more complex. So as a review, this was the basic Python operators. As I said, there are many others beyond just this handful here. This is just an introduction. Ideal situation is to practice as much as you can. I mean, I just made this up, pretty much off the top of my head. It's not really connected to anything in particular, but it's a really great way to practice. You can either run the code first and try to trace through it manually to see if you get the same answer or vice versa. This is mathematics after all, so the best way to learn math, to work with math, is to practice it just like with programming. And as we proceed through the remainder of this series, we'll be working with many other operators and these as well, on and off throughout a lot of the other exercises. As always, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to let me know. Otherwise, thank you for listening.